They say a mother's worst nightmare is watching her child suffer. But nobody tells you about the nightmare of being humiliated by your own son's wife, on what should have been the happiest day of his life. I remember standing there, in that enormous ballroom, wearing the dress I'd bought 3 months in advance. Navy blue, elegant, simple. I thought I looked nice. Not stunning, not magazine cover perfect, but nice. Appropriate for the mother of the groom. The chandeliers sparkled above me like 1,000 tiny stars, and the smell of white roses filled the air so thick you could almost taste it. Everyone was smiling, toasting, laughing. The photographer was moving from table to table, capturing what would become memories. I was standing near the main table, waiting for the official family photo. My son had asked me to be there early. He wanted me front and center, he said. He wanted the world to know I was the reason he was the man he'd become. I believed him. Then she walked over. Jessica, my new daughter-in-law, 26 years old, long blonde hair, a body sculpted by personal trainers and diet plans I could never afford when I was her age. She looked at me the way people look at things they want removed from their line of sight. She stopped 3 feet away, tilted her head and smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already decided I didn't belong. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and sweet at the same time, like poisoned honey. "Could you move? You're blocking the shot." I blinked. "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought—" "No, seriously," she interrupted louder now, loud enough that people nearby turned to look. "Step aside. This is a wedding, not a butcher shop. We don't need a fat pig ruining the photos." Silence. The kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. And then laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. Enough that it felt like the walls were closing in. Enough that my throat tightened and my vision blurred. I looked at my son. He was standing 10 feet away, frozen, his mouth half open like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Jessica turned back toward the photographer, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Okay, now we can start," she said brightly, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like the first line in a dam before the flood. And then I saw him, a man at the main table, mid-50s, graying hair, expensive suit. He was staring at me, his face drained of all color. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who'd just realized they made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Because he recognized me. Richard Calloway, Jessica's father, senior project manager at Henderson and Associates, the consulting firm where he'd worked for 20 years, climbing ranks, earning promotions, building what he thought was an untouchable career. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the woman who'd just been called a fat pig in front of 200 guests was the silent partner who owned 47% of that company. The woman who'd saved it from bankruptcy. The woman who approved his salary increases. The woman who held his entire future in her hands. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what country you are watching from. It helps keep this community alive. I watched the color drain from Richard's face as recognition dawned. He leaned toward his wife, whispering something urgent. She glanced at me, her eyes widening in shock. They knew. And in that moment, standing there in my navy blue dress, with mascara threatening to run down my cheeks, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to do something far more devastating. I was going to remember every insult, every slight, every moment they'd treated me like I was invisible. And then I was going to show them exactly who I was. The music swelled. The photographer called for the family. Jessica grabbed my son's arm and pulled him towards the center of the room, leaving me standing alone at the edge of the frame, exactly where she wanted me. I smoothed down my dress, took a breath, and walked toward the exit. But I didn't leave because I was defeated. I left because I had work to do. Let me take you back. Not to the wedding, not to the humiliation, but to the beginning, to the version of me that nobody at that reception knew existed. 23 years ago, I was a different person. Thinner, yes. Younger, obviously. But more than that, I was invisible in a way that felt almost like a superpower. I worked as a financial analyst for Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't the face of anything. I was the woman in the back office who made sure the numbers added up, who caught the discrepancies, who knew where every dollar came from and where it went, and I was good at it. So good that when the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, when 3 major clients pulled out in the same month and the senior partners were talking about liquidation, the board came to me. Not to the lawyers, not to the senior partners who'd spent decades building their reputations. To me. They offered me a deal. Invest $500,000, everything I'd saved, everything I'd inherited from my late parents, and become a silent partner. No public acknowledgement, no nameplate on the door, no seat at the executive table, just ownership, real, legal, binding ownership, 47% of the company. I said yes, because I knew something they didn't. The company wasn't failing because of bad luck or market conditions. It was failing because of bad people. People who were stealing, skimming, hiding money in offshore accounts and fake contracts. I spent the next 9 months cleaning house, quietly, methodically, ruthlessly. I didn't fire anyone publicly. I didn't make announcements. I just removed the rot, one contract at a time, one audit at a time, one carefully documented investigation at a time. The senior partner who'd been billing personal vacations as business expenses, gone. The account manager who'd been approving invoices from vendors that didn't exist, gone. The HR director who'd been embezzling from the employee pension fund, gone. I didn't make noise. I didn't seek credit. I just did what needed to be done. And the company survived. More than survived. It thrived. Within 5 years, we were worth 30 times what we'd been when I invested. Within 10 years, we were one of the top consulting firms in the region, with offices in 4 cities and contracts with some of the biggest corporations in the country. But I stayed silent. I stayed in the background, because that's where I was most powerful. My name appeared on exactly 2 documents: the original partnership agreement and the quarterly dividend reports that went directly to my personal bank account. To everyone else at Henderson and Associates, from the receptionist to the senior executives, I was just Margaret Foster, the analyst who'd worked there in the early days and then quietly retired to raise her son. Nobody knew I owned nearly half the company. Nobody knew I reviewed every major financial decision. Nobody knew that when the board met to discuss strategy, promotions, or terminations, they sent me the minutes and waited for my approval. I was a ghost, a shadow, a name on a contract that nobody bothered to read, and that's exactly how I wanted it, until the day my son brought home his fiancée. "Mom," he'd said, his face glowing with happiness, "I want you to meet Jessica Calloway." She'd walked into my modest 3-bedroom house, the same house where I'd raised my son alone after his father died, and looked around with barely concealed disdain. "This is cozy," she'd said, which is rich person code for disappointingly small. "Thank you," I'd replied, choosing to hear it as a compliment. "Jessica's father works at a consulting firm downtown," my son continued, oblivious to the tension. "Henderson and Associates, have you heard of it?" I smiled. "I have." "He's been there for almost 20 years, Jessica added. Her chin lifted slightly. "He's a senior project manager. Very successful." "How wonderful," I said. And I meant it. At that moment, I genuinely did. Because I thought, maybe naively, that Richard Calloway was one of the good ones. one of the employees who'd come to the company after I'd cleaned it up, one of the honest, hard-working people who deserved their success. I thought his daughter would see my son for who he was, kind, intelligent, hard-working, honest. I thought love would be enough. Have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be completely different than you thought? Tell me in the comments. The first warning sign came 3 weeks later, at a dinner Jessica's family hosted at their home. And what a home it was. 6,000 square feet in the most expensive neighborhood in the city. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a wine cellar that probably cost more than most people's houses. Richard greeted us at the door, all smiles and firm handshakes. "Welcome, welcome. Come in, Margaret. Make yourself at home." His wife, Patricia, was the picture of country club elegance, designer dress, perfect hair, smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So lovely to finally meet you properly," she said, air kissing near my cheeks. "We've heard so much about you." I doubted that. Over dinner, catered of course with servers in white gloves, Jessica dominated the conversation, talking about the wedding plans. "We're thinking the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel," she announced. "It's expensive, but Daddy says we only get married once, so it should be perfect." "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart," Richard said, patting her hand. "Of course, we'll need to be strategic about the guest list," Jessica continued. "We want to make sure the photos look good. You know, young, attractive people. It's going to be all over social media." She glanced at me briefly, then away. The message was clear. My son squeezed my hand under the table. "Mom will look beautiful," he said firmly. "Oh, of course," Jessica chirped. "I just mean, we want everything to be aesthetically cohesive." Patricia jumped in. "Jessica has such an eye for these things. She's considering a career in event planning, you know. With Richard's connections," Jessica added, "I'm sure I could get clients from all the top firms, including Henderson and Associates." I took a sip of water and said nothing. After dinner, while my son and Jessica went to look at wedding venues on her laptop, Richard pulled me aside. "I hope you don't mind me saying," he began, his voice low and confidential, "but your son is punching above his weight with Jessica." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I just mean, she could have had anyone, lawyers, doctors, executives, but she chose him because she saw something special." He smiled. "I hope he realizes how lucky he is." "I hope she realizes the same," I replied coolly. He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Well, of course, of course." That night, driving home, my son was quiet. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, but he didn't sound convincing. "If you're having doubts—" "I'm not," he said quickly. "I love her, Mom, I really do." "Okay," I said, but I made a mental note to pay closer attention to Richard Calloway's employment file. Not because I was looking for trouble, but because something about that dinner, about the ostentatious house, the casual cruelty in Jessica's eyes, the condescension in Richard's voice, didn't sit right. 2 days later, I logged into the company's secure financial system from my home office. I pulled up Richard's employee record, and that's when I started to notice the cracks. Richard Calloway's salary was $175,000 per year. Good money, excellent money really, for a senior project manager. But it wasn't 6,000 square foot mansion in the most expensive part of town money. I pulled up his expense reports next. That's where things got interesting. Over the past 5 years, Richard had submitted nearly $200,000 in reimbursement requests. Business travel, client dinners, conference fees, hotels, all approved by his direct supervisor, all seemingly legitimate. But I'd been doing this for 23 years. I knew what legitimate expenses looked like. And these had patterns that made my analyst's instincts twitch. Multiple trips to Las Vegas, billed as client development meetings, but with no corresponding client contract signed. Dinners at five-star restaurants charged to the company, but with no clients listed in the expense description, just team building. Hotel stays that lasted 4 or 5 nights, but with airfare for only one person when the expense report claimed he was traveling with colleagues. I dug deeper. I cross-referenced his submitted receipts with the company's client database. 3 of the client meetings he'd billed were with companies that had never been our clients. 2 more were with companies that had stopped being our clients years before his alleged meetings. I sat back in my chair, staring at my screen. Richard Calloway wasn't just padding his expenses. He was committing fraud. But I didn't act immediately. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to see how deep the rot went. So I started investigating everything. His project billings, his vendor approvals, his consulting contracts. And that's when I found the shell corporations, 4 of them, all registered in Delaware, where corporate ownership records are notoriously opaque, all listed as consulting subcontractors that Henderson and Associates had paid over the past 7 years. Payments totaling nearly $800,000. I hired a private investigator, discreetly paying cash, to look into the ownership of these companies. 3 weeks later, the investigator sent me a report. The shell corporations were owned by Richard Calloway, his wife Patricia, and their daughter Jessica. They'd been billing Henderson and Associates for consulting services that never happened, creating fake invoices, approving their own payments, stealing from the company I'd saved, stealing from me. I felt sick, not just because of the theft, though that was bad enough, but because my son was about to marry into this family, a family built on lies, fraud, and casual cruelty. I printed everything, every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence. I built a file 3 inches thick, and I waited. Have you ever discovered someone you trusted was betraying you all along? How did you react? Tell me in the comments. The months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in slow-burn psychological warfare. Jessica never yelled, never screamed. She was too smart for that. Instead, she suggested I might want to sit in the back row during the ceremony so the photographer could focus on the younger family members. She suggested I skip the bridal shower because it's really more for her friends and colleagues, you understand. She suggested, over dinner in front of my son, that maybe I should consider a spa weekend before the wedding to help me feel more confident. When I politely declined, she sighed. I'm just worried about the photos, you know? We want everything to look cohesive. My son tried to defend me. Mom looks fine, Jessica. Fine? Jessica repeated, her voice sharp. This is our wedding, not a casual barbecue. I need better than fine. He went quiet, and I watched him shrink a little. Each time she criticized me, each time she made a suggestion, each time she looked at me with that particular mixture of pity and contempt, I saw my son become smaller, less confident, less himself, more desperate to please her. I wanted to shake him, to tell him what I'd discovered about her family, to show him the evidence, but I couldn't. Not yet, because if I revealed what I knew before the wedding, he'd think I was trying to sabotage his happiness. He'd think I was the jealous mother who couldn't let go. So I smiled. I nodded. I played the part. And I continued building my case. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica called me. I need to talk to you about the seating arrangements, she said without preamble. Of course, I replied. We're putting you at table 12, with some of my dad's work friends from out of town. Table 12 was in the back corner of the ballroom, behind a structural column. I thought I'd be at the family table, I said carefully. The family table is for immediate family only, Jessica said. That's me, my parents, my siblings, and my grandparents. I'm the mother of the groom. Yes, and you'll have a lovely seat at table 12. Those people are very nice. Jessica. Look, she interrupted, her voice hardening. I don't want to be rude, but this is my wedding. I've worked very hard to make everything perfect. and I need people who fit the aesthetic I'm going for. Silence. Are you saying I don't fit your aesthetic? I asked quietly. I'm saying, Jessica replied, choosing her words carefully, that I want the photos to be beautiful, and having you in the center of the frame might be distracting. I closed my eyes. Fine, I said. Table 12 is fine. Thank you for understanding, she said brightly. See you at the wedding. She hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. And then I opened my laptop and sent an email to the board of directors at Henderson and Associates. Gentlemen, I need to schedule an emergency meeting. The Monday after Richard Calloway's daughter's wedding, 9 a.m. sharp, attendance mandatory. There's something you all need to see. They thought I was weak. They thought I was defeated. They had no idea what I was preparing. The wedding day arrived. I wore my navy blue dress. I did my makeup carefully. I arrived early like a good mother should. And I stood near the main table, waiting for the family photo that Jessica had relegated me out of. That's when she walked over. That's when she called me a fat pig. That's when the room erupted in laughter. And that's when her father, Richard Calloway, looked at me and realized his entire world was about to collapse. The laughter didn't last long, maybe 10 seconds, 15 at most, but it felt like an eternity. I stood there, frozen, my face burning, my vision blurring at the edges. Around me, 200 people, friends, family, strangers, were either laughing or pretending they hadn't heard. Jessica had already turned away, flipping her hair over her shoulder, repositioning herself for the photographer. My son was staring at her, his mouth open, his face pale with shock and confusion, and Richard Calloway was staring at me. I watched the recognition dawn on his face in stages. First, confusion. Who is this woman? Then recognition. Wait, I know that face. Then disbelief. No, it can't be. Then horror. Oh God, no! He leaned over to his wife, gripping her arm hard enough that she winced. That's her, he hissed. What? Patricia looked confused. That's her, the silent partner, the one who owns... He cut himself off, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was listening. But I heard him, and he knew I heard him. Our eyes met across the ballroom. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't react at all. I just looked at him. And then I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard my son calling my name. Mom, wait! But I didn't stop. I walked through the hotel lobby, past the valets, past the fountains and the rose gardens, all the way to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, my hands shaking, and then I drove home. Not because I was running away, but because I had exactly 48 hours before my meeting with the board, and I needed to make sure everything was perfect. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining room table with my laptop, 3 monitors, and the file I'd been building for months. I organized everything chronologically. I created summaries. I highlighted the most damning evidence. I prepared exhibits and reference materials. By sunrise, I had a presentation that would destroy Richard Calloway's career, his reputation, and quite possibly his freedom. But I wasn't done. I wanted to understand how deep the corruption went. So I dug into the other senior managers at Henderson and Associates. I cross-referenced expense reports, vendor payments, project billings, and I found 2 more executives who'd been running similar schemes, smaller scale, less sophisticated, but still theft. By Sunday evening, I had enough evidence to justify terminating 4 senior employees and referring 3 of them for criminal prosecution. My phone rang 17 times that weekend. My son, Richard, Patricia, even Jessica once. I didn't answer. On Monday morning, I dressed in my best suit, charcoal gray, tailored, expensive, and drove to the Henderson and Associates headquarters. I arrived at 8:30. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. I went to the executive conference room and set up my presentation. At 8:55, the board members started filing in. 6 men, all of them older than me. All of them successful, powerful, wealthy. None of them knew I was the reason their company still existed. The CEO, Marcus Henderson, grandson of the company's founder, took his seat at the head of the table. "Margaret," he said, smiling warmly, "it's been too long. To what do we owe this unexpected pleasure?" I smiled back. "Gentlemen, thank you for meeting on such short notice. I promise this won't take long." I dimmed the lights and turned on the projector. "For those of you who may have forgotten," I began, "my name is Margaret Foster. 23 years ago, when this company was on the verge of bankruptcy, I invested $500,000 and became a silent partner with 47% ownership." A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. They remembered now. "Since that time, I've remained silent. I've let you run the company. I've collected my dividends and stayed out of the day-to-day operations." I clicked to the next slide. "But I've been watching, and what I've found is deeply concerning." For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through everything. Richard Calloway's fraudulent expense reports, the shell corporations, the fake invoices, the stolen money. I showed them bank records, email trails, signed contracts. I showed them how Richard had been stealing from the company for 7 years, how he'd used that money to buy a mansion, luxury cars, fund his daughter's extravagant lifestyle. I showed them 2 other senior managers who'd been running similar schemes. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Marcus Henderson's face was gray. "How much?" he asked quietly. "Richard Calloway alone? Just over $1.2 million. Someone swore under their breath. The other 2 executives combined? Another $400,000. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered. "I have copies of all the evidence for each of you," I said, distributing folders around the table, along with my recommendations for immediate action. The CFO, a man named Thomas, who'd always been kind to me in the early days, looked up. "What are you recommending?" "Immediate termination of all 3 individuals. Referral to law enforcement for criminal prosecution. Civil suits to recover the stolen funds. And a complete forensic audit of every senior manager's expenses for the past 10 years. Marcus nodded slowly. "Done." "There's one more thing," I said. They all looked at me. "Richard Calloway's daughter married my son this weekend." The room went very quiet. "She publicly humiliated me at the wedding reception, called me a fat pig in front of 200 guests. I saw a few of the men wince. "I want you to know that my recommendations have nothing to do with personal revenge. The evidence stands on its own. But I also want you to understand that I will not be silent anymore, about anything." Marcus stood up and extended his hand. "Margaret, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for not seeing this sooner, for taking advantage of your willingness to stay in the background. You saved this company once, and you just saved it again." I shook his hand. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Now I make some very unpleasant phone calls." Richard Calloway was fired at 10:30 that Monday morning. Security escorted him from the building. He was allowed to take his personal items, a few photos, a coffee mug, a jacket, and nothing else. His company laptop, phone, and access cards were confiscated immediately. By noon, the police had been notified. By 2 p.m., Henderson and Associates had filed a civil lawsuit seeking full restitution plus damages. By 5 p.m., news of Richard's termination had spread through the entire company. And by 6 p.m., Richard was sitting in his expensive mansion, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. I know this because my son called me that evening. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" "I did my job," I replied calmly. "Jessica's father was fired today, Security walked him out of the building. She's hysterical. Her mom is talking about getting lawyers. They're saying you sabotaged him because of what happened at the wedding. Is that what they're saying? Did you? Your father-in-law, I said carefully, has been stealing from Henderson and Associates for 7 years. He created fake companies, submitted fraudulent invoices, and embezzled over $1.2 million. The board has evidence. The police have evidence. This has nothing to do with the wedding. Silence on the other end. You're one of the board members, he asked. No. Then how? I'm the silent partner, I said. I own 47% of the company. More silence. You own... He couldn't finish the sentence. I've owned it for 23 years, since before you were born. Nobody knew because I didn't want them to know. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't relevant. Until now. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Jessica's father is a criminal, I continued. What he did to me at the wedding was cruel. But what he did to the company, to all the honest employees whose livelihoods depend on Henderson and Associates remaining successful, that was theft, and I won't tolerate it. Does Jessica know? He asked quietly. About her father's crimes? I imagine she's finding out right now. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and exposing the truth? What would you do? Let me know in the comments. The next morning, Jessica showed up at my house. I was in my garden, pulling weeds, when I heard her car door slam. She marched across my lawn in designer heels and a white dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her face was red and blotchy from crying. You bitch, she spat. You destroyed my family. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt off my hands. Your family destroyed itself. My father did nothing wrong. Your father stole over $1 million. That's a lie. You made that up because I hurt your feelings at the wedding. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I went inside, retrieved a copy of the evidence file, and brought it back out. Here, I said, handing it to her. Bank statements, invoices, email trails, corporate registration documents showing that you, your mother, and your father own 4 shell companies that fraudulently billed Henderson and Associates. She stared at the folder, her hands shaking. You're listed as a co-owner, I continued, which means you're complicit. The police will probably want to talk to you. Her face went white. I didn't know what those companies were for. Daddy just said, he said it was for tax purposes. Convenient, I said. You can't do this, she screamed. We'll lose everything, the house, the cars, everything. Yes, I said calmly, you will. She looked at me with pure hatred. This is because I called you fat, isn't it? You're just a vindictive, pathetic woman who can't take a joke. I stepped closer to her. Let me be very clear, I said, my voice low and steady. What you said to me at the wedding was cruel and humiliating, but I would have walked away from that. I would have let it go. I pointed to the folder in her hands. What your father did, what your family did, was steal from people who trusted him, from employees who worked hard and played by the rules, from a company I saved with my own money. That I will not let go. Tears were streaming down her face now. Please, she whispered. Please, I'm begging you, don't do this. I'll apologize. I'll do anything, just make it stop. I looked at this young woman who'd treated me like garbage. This woman who'd belittled me, excluded me, laughed at me. This woman who was now begging me for mercy. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. Just a cold, clear certainty that this was justice. I'm not doing this to you, I said quietly. Your father did this to you when he decided that stealing was easier than earning, when he taught you that you could treat people with cruelty because your family had money and power. I turned to walk back into my house. "The police will be in touch," I said over my shoulder. "I suggest you get a lawyer." The next 3 weeks were brutal, for the Calloway family anyway. For me, they were strangely peaceful. I went to work, my real work, the quiet, analytical work I'd always loved, and I tended my garden and I cooked myself nice dinners. I didn't watch the news, though I heard from colleagues that the story had made the local papers. Senior executive at prominent consulting firm charged with embezzlement. I didn't answer calls from reporters who somehow got my number. I didn't engage with the angry emails Patricia Calloway sent me, calling me every name in the book and threatening to sue me for defamation. I just existed, quietly, calmly, the way I always had. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I was just choosing not to participate in their drama. The police investigation moved quickly. With the evidence I'd provided, they didn't need much additional work. Richard was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing false documents. Patricia was charged as an accomplice. Jessica was questioned extensively, but ultimately not charged. The investigators concluded she'd been willfully ignorant but not actively involved in the fraud. The civil lawsuit from Henderson and Associates was equally straightforward. The Calloway family had no defense. Within 2 weeks, a judge had frozen all their assets. The mansion was seized. The cars were repossessed. Bank accounts were emptied to begin restitution payments. Jessica and her parents moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The life they'd built, the life funded by stolen money, collapsed like a house of cards. And my son? He filed for divorce, not immediately. He tried to make it work at first. He told me he loved Jessica, that she was a victim too, that he wanted to support her through this difficult time. I didn't argue with him. I just listened. But gradually, over late-night phone calls and weekend visits, the truth emerged. Jessica blamed him for everything, for my discovery of her father's crimes, for the police investigation, for their sudden poverty. "If your mother wasn't such a vindictive bitch," she'd scream at him, "none of this would have happened." She told him he should force me to drop the charges, to forgive the stolen money, to be the bigger person. When he explained that I didn't have the power to drop criminal charges, that the state was prosecuting and the company was suing and none of it was up to me anymore, she called him useless. She said marrying him was the biggest mistake of her life. She said his mother was a fat, pathetic nobody who'd gotten lucky. And finally, my son opened his eyes. 3 months after the wedding, he came to my house. He looked thinner, older, exhausted. "I left her," he said simply. I pulled him into a hug. He cried on my shoulder for 20 minutes. When he finally pulled away, he said, "I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything, for not defending you at the wedding, for not seeing what kind of person she really was, for—" "Stop," I said gently. "You loved her. There's no shame in that. I was so stupid." "You were trusting," I corrected. "There's a difference. You saw the best in someone who didn't deserve it. That's not stupidity, that's kindness." He wiped his eyes. "How are you so calm about all of this?" I smiled, because I learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't cruelty, it's clarity, showing people exactly who they are and letting them live with the consequences. We sat together on my porch, watching the sunset, drinking tea in comfortable silence. "What happens now?" he asked eventually. "Now?" I considered. "Now you heal. You rebuild. You learn from this. And you?" I thought about that, about the company I'd saved twice now, about the invisible role I'd played for 23 years, about the weight of staying silent, staying hidden, staying small. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time for me to step into the light." Have you ever realized you needed to stop hiding who you really are? How did it feel? Share in the comments. The following Monday, I attended my first official board meeting. Not as an invisible observer sending notes from home, but as a board member. Marcus Henderson introduced me to the full staff at a company-wide meeting. "Many of you may not know this," he began, "but Henderson and Associates exists today because of one woman. 23 years ago, when we were on the brink of bankruptcy, Margaret Foster invested her life savings and became our partner. She's been guiding this company from behind the scenes ever since, and recently she uncovered fraud that could have destroyed everything we've built." He gestured to me. "Margaret, would you like to say a few words?" I stood up, my heart pounding. 300 employees looked at me. Some of them knew me as the quiet analyst from the old days. Most had no idea who I was. "I've spent most of my career invisible," I said, "by choice, because I believed the work mattered more than recognition." I paused. "But I've learned something important. Invisibility can become its own kind of prison. When you hide who you are for too long, people forget you exist. And when people forget you exist, they forget to treat you with basic respect." I looked around the room. Richard Calloway forgot. He forgot that his actions had consequences. He forgot that someone was watching. He forgot that stealing isn't just wrong. It's destructive to everyone who depends on this company. I took a breath. "I'm not telling you this story to celebrate his downfall. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. Integrity matters. Character matters. The choices you make when nobody's watching, those define who you really are." The room was silent. "I'm stepping into a more active role here at Henderson Associates, not because I want power or recognition, but because this company deserves leadership that leads by example, that values honesty, hard work, and respect above everything else." When I sat down, the room erupted in applause, genuine, warm, sustained applause. For the first time in 23 years, I was seen, and it felt good. 6 months after the wedding, Richard Calloway was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Patricia received 3 years probation and community service. Jessica wasn't charged, but her reputation was destroyed. The society friends who'd filled her wedding disappeared overnight. The influencer career she'd been building on social media collapsed when sponsors learned about her family's crimes. She had to get a job, a real job, waiting tables at a restaurant downtown. I heard all of this through my son, who heard it through mutual acquaintances. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy, just a distant sense that justice had been served. Henderson and Associates recovered most of the stolen money through asset seizures and restitution payments. The company implemented new oversight procedures, mandatory ethics training, and whistleblower protections. And I took on a new role, Chief Ethics Officer. It wasn't a position that existed before I created it, but Marcus and the board agreed it was necessary. My job was simple: ensure that what happened with Richard Calloway never happened again. I reviewed all major financial transactions. I conducted random audits. I created anonymous reporting channels for employees who suspected misconduct, and I made it absolutely clear that fraud, theft, and corruption would not be tolerated, no matter who you were or how long you'd been with the company. The work was satisfying in a way my silent partnership never had been. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was building something. My son healed slowly but surely. The divorce was finalized without drama. Jessica didn't contest it, probably because she couldn't afford a lawyer. He moved into a small apartment near my house. We had dinner together twice a week. Sometimes we talked about what had happened, sometimes we didn't. But the important thing was that he was rebuilding his life on solid ground, on honesty, on self-respect, on the understanding that love without respect isn't really love at all. I keep thinking about what Jessica said at the wedding, he told me one evening over pasta. The way she called you, that name, and how I just stood there. You were in shock, I said. I should have defended you immediately. You were confused. You loved her. You didn't want to believe she was capable of that kind of cruelty." He shook his head. "I saw the signs, Mom. The way she talked about people, the way she treated service workers. I didn't want to see them." "Now you know better," I said gently. "And that's worth something." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "How did you stay so strong through all of it?" I thought about that question for a long time. "I think," I finally said, "it's because I knew who I was. Even when nobody else did. Even when they treated me like I was invisible or worthless or in the way, I knew my own value." I reached across the table and took his hand. "That's the most important thing I can teach you. Know your own worth. Don't wait for other people to validate it. Don't compromise it for anyone. Because when you know who you are, really know it, nothing anyone says can destroy you." He squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom." "For what?" "For being you. For showing me what real strength looks like. What's the most important lesson someone taught you about self-worth? I'd love to hear your story in the comments." A year after the wedding, I sold my shares in Henderson and Associates, not because I was angry or disillusioned, but because I'd done what I needed to do. I'd saved the company twice. I'd exposed the corruption. I'd built systems to prevent it from happening again. And now it was time for someone else to carry that torch. Marcus was disappointed, but understanding. "You've earned this," he said when I told him. "Whatever you do next, you've more than earned it." The sale made me wealthy, genuinely wealthy, not living comfortably wealthy. I could have bought a mansion, traveled the world, lived in luxury. Instead, I bought a small house by the ocean, 2 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of waves. Every evening, I sit on my porch and watch the sun set over the water. I read books. I cook elaborate meals just for myself. I take long walks on the beach. Sometimes my son visits, and we spend weekends fishing or cooking together, or just sitting in comfortable silence. Sometimes old colleagues from Henderson and Associates call to ask for advice, and I'm happy to give it. But mostly, I'm alone. And I'm happy. Because I learned something through all of this. Something that took me 58 years to truly understand. The best revenge isn't cruelty. It isn't public humiliation or dramatic confrontations. It's building a life so full, so peaceful, so authentically yours that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant. It's knowing that while they're drowning in the consequences of their own choices, you're sitting on a porch by the ocean, drinking coffee, watching the sunrise, and feeling genuinely, deeply grateful for everything you have. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica tried to contact me once, about 8 months after I moved to the beach house. She sent a letter to my old address, which my son forwarded to me. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and explanations. She was sorry for what she'd said at the wedding. She'd been under stress. She'd been influenced by her parents. She was young and stupid and didn't understand the consequences of her words. She hoped I could forgive her. She hoped we could move past this. For my son's sake. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not because I was cruel, but because forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I could forgive her for being young and thoughtless and cruel, but I didn't owe her a relationship. I didn't owe her my time, my energy, or my emotional labor. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. The last time I saw Richard Calloway was at his sentencing hearing. I wasn't required to attend, but I chose to. I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as the judge read the charges, the evidence, the sentence. Richard stood there in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulders slumped, his face gray. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in 6 months. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Richard turned slightly and his eyes found mine. We looked at each other for a long moment, and then he said, "I'm sorry." Not to the court, not to the company, to me. I didn't nod, I didn't react. I just looked at him until he turned away. After the hearing, as I was leaving the courthouse, Richard's lawyer approached me. "Mrs. Foster," he said carefully, "my client wanted me to tell you something." "I'm listening." He said if he'd known who you really were, what you'd done for the company, how much power you actually had, he never would have let his daughter speak to you that way. I looked at the lawyer for a long moment. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "He should have treated me with respect regardless of who I was, because every human being deserves basic dignity, not just the ones with money and power." The lawyer blinked. Yes, you're absolutely right. Tell your client," I said, "that I hope he uses his time in prison to become a better man. Not a more careful one, a better one." I walked away before he could respond. It's been 3 years now since the wedding. 3 years since Jessica called me a fat pig in front of 200 people. 3 years since Richard Calloway's face went pale with recognition. 3 years since I stopped being invisible. I'm 61 years old now. My hair is grayer, my body is older. I'm still overweight by society's ridiculous standards. But I've never been happier. My son is thriving. He's dating someone new, a kind, thoughtful woman who treats him like an equal partner. He's talking about going back to school, pursuing the career he always wanted instead of the one he thought would impress Jessica. Henderson and Associates is stronger than ever, with ethical leadership and a culture of accountability. And me? I wake up every morning in my little house by the ocean, make myself coffee, and sit on the porch watching the waves. Sometimes I think about that moment at the wedding, the silence after Jessica's insult, the laughter that followed, the humiliation that burned through me like acid, and I realize something profound. That moment, as painful as it was a gift, because it forced me to stop hiding. It forced me to use the power I'd been sitting on for 23 years. It forced me to remember that dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. Jessica taught me that cruelty reveals character. Richard taught me that power without integrity is just corruption waiting to be exposed. And life taught me that the best revenge is living so well, so fully, so authentically, that the people who try to diminish you become nothing more than a cautionary tale you tell yourself on quiet mornings by the ocean. I don't hate them anymore. I don't even think about them most days, because hatred is heavy and resentment is a prison, and I'm finally, beautifully, completely free. If this story touched you, subscribe to this channel. Your support keeps this community alive. And tell me, what's the most important lesson you've learned from betrayal or humiliation? How did you rebuild yourself afterward? Because that's the real story, isn't it? Not the fall, not the revenge, but the rising, the rebuilding. The moment you look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back as someone worthy of respect, starting with your own. Your comments keep this community strong. Share your story, your truth, your lesson. And remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift, the element of surprise. Use it wisely